Welcome back to your news bulletin. In the United Kingdom, the COVID-19 death toll has risen to nearly 13,000 after another 761 succumbed to the disease in the last 24 hours. Spain has recorded over 18,500 fatalities, while the United States has reported more than 26,000 deaths. Globally, more than 127,000 people have died, while 500,000 have recovered. The world is close to reaching another somber figure in the coronavirus pandemic as the tally of confirmed cases gets near to 2 million. It's less than 2 weeks since the world reached a million confirmed cases. More than 600,000 cases have been recorded in the US alone. Nearly 130,000 people have died globally, and more than 500,000 have recovered so far. The number of confirmed cases in Spain has risen by almost 5,100 to reach over 177,000. It is the country's highest daily rise in infections in 5 days. The EU has warned member states to be cautious when lifting lockdown measures. In Iran, the daily number of deaths has fallen below 100 for the second day in a row. It reported 94 deaths in the past 24 hours, bringing the overall toll to 4,700. Meanwhile, China reports a decline in new cases in the country, although an increasing number of local transmissions in its bordering Russia remains a concern for the authorities. Some economic respite as the G20 group of leading economies have agreed to suspend debt payments owed to them by some of the world's poorest countries. In a statement, the group said the move aims to help countries deal with the economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. The agreement covers money that is due to be paid to G20 countries up to the end of 2020. However, payments will have to be made between 2022 and 2024, along with interest accrued in the meantime. The delay will cover payments worth an estimated $12 billion. In all, 77 countries are due to benefit from the agreement. US President Donald Trump's decision to cut funding for the World Health Organization has been slammed world over. Capitals around the globe have said the move threatens to exacerbate the COVID-19 pandemic at a time when the crisis is in a critical stage. This includes both US allies and rivals. The US is the World Health Organization's biggest donor, providing 15% of its budget. Now, President Donald Trump has cut all funding for the health body, accusing it of promoting Chinese misinformation about the coronavirus. Shortly after, leaders of countries allied with the US condemned the move. NATO members Germany, Australia, and the UK say they have no intention of following in Washington's footsteps. Taking to Twitter, German Foreign Minister and President Trump was playing a pointless blame game. In the UN, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said now was not the time to cut funds. Meanwhile, Beijing has urged the US to continue fulfilling its obligations to the Geneva-based organization. President Trump's decision has also been condemned on US soil. US Congressman Eliot Engel says the president has returned to his old playbook of blaming others for his mistakes. Philanthropist Bill Gates says the announcement is as dangerous as it sounds. Now, as the COVID-19 crisis worsens, global drug companies and scientists have enhanced research for COVID-19 vaccinations. China's scientists have started second phase of clinical trial for the coronavirus vaccine in the hardest hit city of Wuhan in Hubei province. The vaccine is constructed by genetic engineering methods and is used to prevent diseases caused by coronavirus infections. Developers say they are focusing on the elderly people as the fatal virus hits them the most. The UK's pharmaceutical giants GlaxoSmithKline have announced to collaborate with France's Sanofi to develop a vaccine. GSK said the world will need more than one COVID-19 vaccine to cater the requirements of global community. Meanwhile, German officials said they have to work closely with World Health Organization in order to invent a vaccine. The new coronavirus death toll in Pakistan has surged to 107 as 11 people died in the last 24 hours across the country. The health ministry said 272 new confirmed cases were reported since yesterday, bringing the total to nearly 6,000. The health ministry said 1,446 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. It said over 73,000 tests have been conducted countrywide, while nearly 3,300 people tested during the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Pakistan International Airlines said it is set to start second phase to bring back stranded citizens from across the world. The airline said Pakistanis will be repatriated from Canada, South Korea, Indonesia, and the UK from April 15th to the 20th. In India, uncertainty, fear, and exhaustion are at their peak after the government announced to extend COVID-19 curfew till May 3rd. The migrant workers are facing the biggest difficulties without home, job, and shortage of food and shelter. After Mumbai, thousands of migrant workers gathered in Gujarat state, demanding they should be sent to their homes. The migrant workers gathered in Varacha area of the Surat city and sat on a road demanding transport from the government. Meanwhile, hundreds of workers are living in temporary shelters in Uttar Pradesh with no job and money. Talking to the media, the workers said they were fired from their jobs on March 22nd, right after the Janta curfew across the country. India has recorded 392 deaths and over 11,400 total coronavirus infections across the country. More from India. Over 3,300 notables, including retired judges, writers, and rights activists, have criticized government efforts to curb media. Earlier in Uttar Pradesh, police filed an FIR against a journalist for highlighting the state chief minister's plan to hold a religious event amid the lockdown. In a statement, civil society said the UP government sent policemen driving across 700 kilometers during the lockdown to issue the summons. They said, sending police despite operational postal service speaks volumes of the state government's priorities. The civil society asked the government to withdraw the FIR and drop criminal charges against the journalist over an entirely factual story. They also urged the center and all state governments not to use the COVID-19 pandemic to trample the media's freedom. The signatories to the statement include former Supreme Court judge and 2 former chiefs of naval staff. Moving on, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington has achieved its primary mission in Afghanistan by defeating Al-Qaeda. In an interview, the secretary said currently there are only a few hundred Al-Qaeda fighters left in Afghanistan. Pompeo said the Taliban have been told to break with those who targeted New York City. The Secretary of State said he thinks Washington and its forces have achieved this goal of counterterrorism. He said when the U.S. is done with what it needs, it will get its team back home. The secretary said its forces can protect the U.S. without having tens of thousands of soldiers stationed abroad. The U.S. State Department has warned that North Korea's malicious cyber activities threaten countries around the world. In an advisory, it said North Korea's hacking poses a significant threat to the stability of the international financial system. The statement said North Korea's activities could be harmful for critical infrastructure in the U.S. It also accused Pyongyang of generating revenue through cybercrime for building destructive weapons. It urged the international community to stay vigilant and work together to mitigate the cyber threat posed by North Korea. In another news, in South Korea, exit polls suggest President Moon Jae-in's ruling party is projected to win the general elections held during the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. The Election Commission said over 62% of voters turned out to cast their ballot to elect a 300-member unicameral parliament. Moon's progressive camp is on track to secure up to 177 seats. Over 11 million people have already cast their ballots during last week's 2-day early voting, including those who voted via post. Over 13,000 people in self-quarantine are also allowed to cast their ballots after regular voting ends. Turkish and Russian troops have conducted their 4th joint patrol in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. The patrol is being conducted in line with the Moscow agreement. In a tweet, the Turkish Defense Ministry said the joint patrol was conducted by air and ground vehicles. The patrol covered the M4 highway, which connects the cities of Aleppo and Latakia. Earlier this week, Russian army planes carried out patrols along a fixed route in northern Syria. The two countries agreed on a protocol which urged parties to cease all military actions along the line of contact in the Idlib de-escalation zone. The Turkish Armed Forces have neutralized 6 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants over a 24-hour period. 4 of the militants were killed in northern Iraq, while another 2 were neutralized in southeastern Turkey. All the PKK militants were killed in air-backed operations. In a tweet, the Turkish Defense Ministry said they were located using reconnaissance and surveillance operations. The ministry said Turkey will continue destroying weapon caches and shelters used by these terrorists. It said the forces will not stop the operations against militants in or outside Turkish borders. PKK militants often take shelter in northern Iraq to conduct cross-border attacks. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. To end months of political deadlock, Iraq's Prime Minister designate Mustafa al-Kadhimi said that his new cabinet is ready for parliament's approval. Speaking in Baghdad, al-Kadhimi said he is negotiating with political blocs to get their approval as early as possible. The premier said his main priority would be to tackle Iraq's economic crisis following a sharp decline in oil prices. He said the crisis needs strong measures to confront it, as the government has to contain COVID-19 as well as hold elections at the earliest. Al-Kadhimi vowed to keep Iraq away from regional conflicts, especially as tensions between the US and Iran are felt in the country. Iraq has been roiled by mass protests since early October over poor living conditions and corruption, forcing Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi to resign. Iraq says its forces have killed 8 ISIS militants in clashes in the northern Kirkuk province. The paramilitary Harshabi forces said they carried out an operation with the military in the Kirkuk area. In a statement, the forces said the operation was backed by Iraqi helicopter gunships. The statement did not give details about the casualties among the Iraqi forces. The raid comes a day after the Iraqi troops killed 23 ISIS fighters. Libya's UN-recognized government says its troops conducted airstrikes against Khalifa Haftar's eastern forces fleeing al-Batia airbase. The raids come after Haftar's forces killed 8 government soldiers in drone strikes in the western mountain city of Jatu. A government's military spokesman said the army have laid a siege to the airbase to prevent reinforcements from reaching Haftar's remaining forces inside. He said the government forces have also extended their control to over 3,000 square kilometers in the cities west of Tripoli. He said the troops took control of Egyptian and UAE's arms arsenal, containing large quantities of ammunition and military equipment for the LNA. Tensions in the North African country are high since the government accelerated their strikes and recaptured 6 coastal cities. Egypt says its security forces have killed 7 militants during a raid in the Al-Amiria neighborhood in Cairo. The Interior Ministry said a policeman was killed during the clashes, while 3 other officers were wounded. The ministry said security forces carried out the raid on the armed terrorist cell over an intelligence provided by the security agency. It said weapons and ammunition were found with the suspects. The ministry said the militants were planning attacks on Coptic churches ahead of their Easter celebrations next Sunday. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. In a new development, the Arab League has warned against an Israeli plot to annex more occupied Palestinian territories amid global focus on COVID-19. In a statement, the League's Secretary General Ahmad Abul Ghaid raised concerns about the grave consequences of the pandemic on the Palestinian cause. Abul Ghaid expressed concerns of the livelihood of residents in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, as well as the refugee camps. He warned that Israeli steps will devastate the Palestinian economy in severe crisis. Abul Ghaid said Tel Aviv wants to annex occupied Palestinian lands such as the Jordan Valley and the northern West Bank. The Secretary General said the annexations will represent a dangerous ignition of the situation with unpredictable consequences. Earlier, the Palestinian organization also warned about Israel's plans of annexing lands amid the pandemic. The European Union says managing the healthcare and economic crisis caused by COVID-19 costs over $3 trillion for Europe. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that the exit strategy should not be interpreted as a signal to immediately lift confinement. Speaking at a press conference, she said the measures need to be slowly eased to avoid an even greater economic fallout. Von der Leyen also called for the donors' conference to fund research on a vaccine against the coronavirus. The EU strategy calls for first ending control measures at the internal borders among member states. It warns that any level of gradual relaxation of the confinement will unavoidably lead to a corresponding increase in new cases. The bloc has been struggling to find a coordinated approach in fighting the coronavirus since its outbreak. Governors of the Brazilian states of Rio and Pará have tested positive for COVID-19 as the deadly virus continues to spread across the country. Rio Governor Wilson Witzel and Pará Governor Helder Barbalho made the announcement via social media posts. In Sao Paulo, Brazil's military unit was deployed to disinfect public spaces as the country's confirmed cases topped 25,000 with over 1,500 deaths. Meanwhile, Peru's government said the country will return to normal levels of productive activity in 2021. In Brazil, Health Minister Henrique Mandetta took a swipe at President Jair Bolsonaro while urging a unified response against the outbreak. Bolsonaro has repeatedly downplayed the pandemic while criticizing state governors for imposing lockdowns. Brazilian civilians said they backed the Health Minister Mandetta over the president.
Without a doubt, I support the health minister over President Bolsonaro. I don't know what's going on in their heads. Their situation is very ugly for our country, and to see there is no unity in government. They are not on the same page. It is clear that people need to be aware of the situation, to come together at this difficult time and to listen to the health ministry undoubtedly. He understands a lot more about health than our president.
Meanwhile, Panama secured $1.3 billion to boost the economy, while IMF provided El Salvador with $389 million in emergency financial assistance. Now, the COVID-19 has hit East Africa, which is already struggling to contain a desert locust invasion that puts millions at risk of starvation. The Food and Agriculture Organization has warned restrictions on movement to contain the virus have compromised the fight against locust invasion. More in this report.
20 million people are facing food insecurity in 6 East African countries already combating locust infestation. The regions includes Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Uganda and Tanzania. Together, these countries also have over 470 confirmed cases of novel coronavirus. The figure likely doesn't present the full picture considering limited access to testing kits in the region. Regardless, measures to slow the spread of the virus have put the food supply in these countries at risk.
When you want to load an aeroplane early in the morning, there is also the restrictions of timing and also locating the swamps because of the curfew. However, we are trying to come up with innovative ways like reducing the number of populations that are being met at once for the training.
The FAO is training farmers to use motorized pesticide sprayers to fight the locust invasion. So far, the initiative has seen 240,000 hectares of land with chemical or biopesticides. But the pandemic has disrupted the supply of both the sprayers and pesticides.
The small-scale farmers, it's a very big problem, and for the food security of Kenya, especially after a problem like the coronavirus, how are we going to feed Kenya? All of our produce is for local consumption, and yeah, I think everyone needs to take this seriously and support everywhere you can, because it's a very big problem. for Kenya as a whole.
The desert locust is considered the most dangerous migratory pest in the world. A swarm of 1 square kilometer can contain up to 80 million locusts, which can eat the same amount of food as 35,000 people.
Now let's look at Taiwan, where tree climbing is getting popular. At a campground, a team of women used ropes to shimmy up a towering 7-story tall China berry trees. More about women bravery in this report.
Tree climbing remains somewhat niche in Taiwan. Now more and more women are embracing the challenge. The credit goes to the island's first international certified female climber and arborist, Sylvia Su. She says popularity of such gatherings in Europe inspired her.
My goal in organizing this camp is to encourage more and more women to get into tree climbing. We don't have restrictions in terms of climbing experience. We can teach you how to climb.
Many of the course attendees are beginners and are afraid of climbing up a 30-meter tall tree. But they feel a women-only camp is a more relaxed environment. Recalling her first climbing experience, a female climber says trees protect her even when wind is blowing.
I threw up the first time I climbed to 10 meters. I was actually very afraid of heights, but I feel very safe whenever I'm up a tree because I feel a tree is like a living being.
A university student plans to become a professional tree surgeon after completing her graduation.
Every time I'm with a tree, I feel like I'm with a friend and companion. I want to help trim its twigs and branches so that it can happily grow again.
Chang Han Chin, a high school teacher at the camp, calls climbing a magical feeling. Out of the 29 certified arborists in Taiwan, only 3 are women.
In Japan, the traditional sushi industry is dominated by men. But now a growing number of women are training to work as sushi chefs. More details in this report.
In Japan, women can rarely be seen as traditional sushi chefs. There are determined women in the country who want to shatter the myth about women chefs. They are working hard to take a place at table as the chef. Mizuho Iwai, a trainer at a top-ranked sushi restaurant, says she wants to challenge things.
There are almost none or very few female chefs in sushi restaurants, and it's not necessarily very well perceived. But that's precisely why, with my adventurous streak, I thought, it's up to you to show that you can do it. And since then, I haven't looked back.
The work can be grueling and requires years to master. Apprentices must learn everything from the names of different types of fish to removing scales and slicing properly. They are even instructed on how to correctly enter through traditional drapes.
In Japan, it is still strongly believed that it is women who take care of family. But sushi chefs work in the evening, so it's difficult for women. That's why I think the number of women who want to become a sushi chef is small in the first place.
Another apprentice, Fukasano, says she didn't think too much about the lack of women in the field and said she is determined to enter the profession.
If there is a different perspective that I can bring as a woman, I hope to make use of it. But I don't want a job that relies on feminine charm. I don't want people to come because I am a woman, but for the food I prepare. I don't want to use gender as a weapon to succeed.
According to Murakami, a teacher at Tokyo Sushi Academy, the world of Japanese cuisine has long been dominated by men, more so than Italian or French cuisine. Murakami estimates women make up less than 10% in this field.
The Cannes Film Festival will not take place this year in France in its original form due to the coronavirus pandemic. But the organizers say they continue to review options for the event. The film festival, one of the largest in the world, was initially due to take place from May 12 to 23rd. However, on Monday, France extended the lockdown until May 11th, which means public events, including festivals, cannot be held. The organizers said they have acknowledged that the postponement of the 73rd International Festival is not an option. The statement added, "It is difficult to assume that the Festival des Cannes could be held this year in its original form." We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. For our top business story, we look at the oil market as oil prices have hit the lowest level since 2002 as US WTI crude plunged to a fraction over $19 per barrel despite the historic OPEC Plus output cut deal. Oil prices have declined as much as 64% this year as worldwide lockdowns mandated by the COVID-19 pandemic slump global demand. Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency said the global oil demand will fall by a record amount this year. IEA said lockdown measures imposed to curb the coronavirus outbreak have brought the global economy to a virtual halt. It said global oil demand will fall by over 9 million barrels per day in 2020. The energy body also said April alone will witness a fall in demand of 29 million barrels per day from a year earlier to levels last seen in 1995. Warning the situation is even more dire than it was during the Great Depression, the IEA added the fall in demand will erase almost a decade of growth. The IMF has warned Australian economy will suffer its largest hit since the Great Depression in the wake of COVID-19 crisis. The fund predicted the country's GDP will contract by nearly 7% to suffer losses over $80 billion this year. The global lender said Australia's economy is expected to sustain a bigger blow than that of countries hit harder by the pandemic. Meanwhile, the UK's Officer for Budget Responsibility forecasted country's GDP could fall 35% in the second quarter of 2020. The OBR forecast British unemployment can rise by over 2 million to 10% in the second quarter. The UK's Finance Minister Rishi Sunak also warned of tough times ahead.
These are tough times, and there will be more to come. As I've said before, we can't protect every business and every household. But we came into this crisis with a fundamentally sound economy, powered by the hard work and ingenuity of the British people.
The UK has pledged to provide over $400 billion of loans to businesses to get through financial troubles. Now, let's look at the Wall Street stocks, which have dropped sharply as dismal economic data and weak bank earnings fueled concerns over COVID-19 impact on the U.S. economy. The U.S. retail sales plunged nearly 9% in March, setting up consumer spending for its worst decline in decades. The shares of Bank of America, Goldman Sachs Group, and Citigroup fell as they joined JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo in setting aside billions to cover loan losses. Grocery stores, pharmacies, and other retailers of essential goods saw a surge in demand last month amid the outbreak. The indices of S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average traded nearly 3% lower. The Nasdaq Composite Index also lost the upward steam. Now let's look at the weather from around the world. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.